Welcome in again to another edition of Musings from the Mountains. I'm Keenan Cummings, managing editor for WVSports.com.
And I'm Patrick Kotnik, staff writer for WVSports.com.
Going to use this episode to kind of reflect a little bit on what's unfolded with the coaching search. West Virginia had 2 assistant vacancies, as we talked about next to last time we spoke. Said that they could be filled maybe soon. Well, boy, was I right. It actually faster than I expected. I thought one would be filled and it would take a little couple days, but
yeah, both of them one day.
Both of them were filled at the same time, and of course it had to happen when I told my wife I would go on a date with her, which obviously went over swimmingly. We don't get to go on a lot. We got 3 young kids. You know how that goes. Who cares? All right, beside that. Let's look here at what West Virginia was able to do, kind of grade what they were able to do, talk about responsibilities, that kind of thing. I don't know if Jared Parker is going to be calling plays for West Virginia. Neil Brown has not specified that yet. But it just in terms of bringing him in as the offensive coordinator / wide receivers coach, Jared Parker, home run, I think. Home run, Pat. I mean, he was the top guy on Neil Brown's board on his first coaching search for wide receiver. Didn't get him. He ended up going to Penn State, where he served as a passing game coordinator / wide receivers coach. Second time's a charm. You know, Neil was able to go out, get him, bumped him up, obviously with responsibility, probably pay as well, but that's part of the process. Still, you get your guy, you get a guy you're comfortable with, a guy you like, a good coach, proven recruiter. What do you think, Pat?
Well, even with, I just want to say just West Virginia overall with Neil, they moved fast on this, with both assistants, especially with, we'll get into this later with Jeff Coons, replacing Blake Seiler. That happened early January. Then a few days, they already had his replacement. But when you consider the holiday season kind of being sandwiched in between those vacancies, West Virginia moved fast. It reminded me very, very much like when Neil got hired after Daniel Holgerson. It was announced that he was going to Houston. Shane Lyons and the whole staff, they went fast in bringing in Neil Brown. The same kind of deal this time. Jared Parker, I think, is going to be a pretty good asset for West Virginia considering his background. Especially when he's given the title offensive coordinator. I mean, it's very intriguing, I would say, for West Virginia fans.
Yeah, he's going to start out making $525,000, which obviously is a nice payday for him. That's going to be bumped up to $550,000 the next year. What he does bring to the table, he's a good coach. Talking with people in the industry, they really like what he's been able to do. In his stops, worked at Purdue, he's worked at Marshall. He's worked his way up the ladder in a sense, and his recent stop at Penn State. Interesting in the sense that a lot of overlap when it comes to recruiting. Really kind of dynamic type recruiting, dynamic personality in a sense. He recruited the state of Kentucky, which is where he's from, and West Virginia for Penn State. And then nationally, kind of the way that Penn State does things is they assign the position coach to recruit their players. So he had his hands in every wide receiver they were recruiting. That's a lot of overlap for 2021, especially some of these guys that have already visited West Virginia, plan to visit West Virginia.
And the in-state guys, too.
Yeah.
One of those being wide receiver Isaiah Johnson, 2021 guy from Bluefield.
Yeah, and Wyatt Millam, same with him as well. I think that he's a guy that, Parker was involved with. So I think that's going to help West Virginia in that regard. But some of these guys he's built relationships, from Maryland, Caden Prather, some of these other guys, Deontay Thornton, guys that have visited West Virginia, are comfortable with West Virginia, now have another reason to be comfortable with West Virginia. He has history recruiting a lot of different places. So I think that from that perspective, home run. Anytime you get your top guy, it's a home run. I don't think that needs any more embellishing or embossing. When you set out on a coaching search and you're able to wrap things up pretty quickly, especially with the dead period ending, West Virginia can kind of jump into recruiting with their staff, hit the ground running, kind of establish connections, divvy up where they're going to be recruiting. There hasn't been necessarily a release to tell us where, but I don't think this is going to change much. I think you'll probably see Parker handle wide receivers, maybe recruit some in Kentucky, Maryland, that kind of area. So Virginia. So that's going to work itself out. But what West Virginia was able to get is really a home run hire. And then you mentioned, Blake Seiler leaves on, I believe January 3rd. West Virginia, by January 8th or 9th, has the position filled with Jeff Coons, who also has made his way around. He last coached at Mississippi, has ties recruiting Texas, has ties in Ohio, has recruited Mississippi junior colleges, recruited Alabama. So not as much overlap when you look at their initial list, who Ole Miss was recruiting compared to who West Virginia and Penn State are recruiting. Some of that's obviously geographical, but could get West Virginia back into Texas. They could use him in different areas. Maybe he'll handle JUCOs, where his father's a coach at Holmes. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how he's mixed in, but you got to feel good with just how this process, everything that came together so quickly, and you walk away. I mean, the end of the story is, do you feel better or do you feel worse than you did before? I think on the surface, you got to feel better. Mm-hmm. That's no knock to what West Virginia lost, because I think Blake Seiler especially is a big loss, but Parker was your guy in the first search, and you're able to get him here second time and keep your staff together at the same time. Obviously there were some title shakeups. Matt Moore's now your assistant head coach. Mm-hmm. Chad Scott's still co-OC, but Parker's your OC, and you kept everybody else. So everybody's happy. You look at that. The interesting thing with Kuntz too, I think when it comes to salary, I believe he starts at $200,000 in his first year, and I'm assuming some money's probably coming from Ole Miss, and then that jumps to $325,000 next year. So Neil's still coming in under budget. If you want to look at that, like I think it's 3.75 is what it was for the assistants. I think they're going to be at 3.4 something. This year, it'll go up again as guys get raises over the year. But 2-year contracts for both assistants. Both have good recruiting ties. Both are kind of dynamic personalities. And it'd be interesting to see how Neil Brown continues to mold this program.
Yeah, I mean, like you hit it right on the money, Keenan. I really feel like if you're West Virginia, this was the best case scenario, getting your top guy in Jared Parker, then getting Jeff Kuntz, who's been all over the place. So I mean, I always said, like, if you can recruit, you can recruit. Obviously connections do matter. But when you recruit a new area, which Jeff Kuntz, who knows what his recruiting duties will be. But if he can recruit, he can recruit. Obviously, if he's going into a new area that hasn't recruited before, or take longer to make some of those connections and all that. But recruiting's recruiting. If you can get guys, then I think he'll have no problem making connections in new places if it comes to that.
Yeah, and you got to look at this, guys. No matter what, even with coaching changes, they're still ahead of where they were last year. Mm-hmm. Most of 2020 heavy lifting is done. 2021 is now about building relationship. The way with the recruiting calendars change things is 2021 recruiting, or the next class, I guess you should say, next year will be 2022. The bulk of that stuff is January now. That used to be shoring up your guys you had in the fold, trying to add some guys for the current class. Now most of that's already in the bag. So you're looking at what's next, mm-hmm. and especially with the new dead period in February, that really limits chances. So you're going to bring guys on campus more in January. Still, West Virginia, you got to feel good about what they did with the assistant coaching hires. I don't think there's any question about that. We do have a few questions. We pandered around, tried to get some questions from you. Patrick, let's see what we got.
All right, we got a couple here. First one, I would really like some insight from you and Shane Lyons, athletic director for West Virginia, about the potential for change to the 25 hard cap on recruits per year. It seems like it has to change since portal was implemented.
Well, yeah, I think it's something they're looking at right now. I think there's already been a suggestion maybe to make it 28 or 30 mm-hmm. per year, and I think you're going to continue to see that, adjusted, looking at different ways to do it, because you're right. With the way that things are currently structured, it's not just the portal. I mean, really this was happening even before the portal. Yeah. Guys have been leaving. It's just so much more in your face now.
There's more turnover now.
Yeah, it's just so much more in your face. It's so much better documented now, because once you're in the portal, you're in the portal. So the problem is you're only able to add 25 guys. And if you take a transfer, that's one of your 25. You don't get a scholarship back if a transfer leaves, at least towards that 25 total. So you're kind of in a bind. It's really hard to keep. Roster management is kind of the buzzword with that, and it's going to continue to be an issue. Really, they've got to be able to find a way for people to stay competitive and have their roster at healthy numbers, but at the same time not avoid some of the oversigning you saw, especially in the SEC in the early 2000s. I mean, they were taking 35 men classes, and some of those that could have played at other schools, sign them, and if they didn't make it, cut them free. But there should be a responsibility to sign smartly, I guess, is the way. But at the same time, you can't penalize those programs that are trying to do it the right way.
Now, one more question here regarding recruiting. How do you see the final recruiting rankings after the February signing period, assuming Gamble signs and 2 others?
I think that entirely depends on who they get. Do they want to use those on transfers? If they do, those won't count towards the recruiting rankings. Unfortunate, but true. I know they're going to take a running back. That's probably going to be a guy that's going to help your rankings. If they sign Gamble, that's going to help too. But the other 2 scholarships, who knows? Maybe
offensive line, and
maybe they're a high school kid. Maybe they're a transfer. I think it'll help. Obviously, you're not going to get hurt by adding players.
Yeah.
But it depends on if the players are going to factor into the formula. Still, I cannot say this enough. With limited time, and a lot of people really don't understand the dynamics of recruiting. Not saying I'm an expert, but a lot of this is done so far in advance, guys. So far. You're recruiting sometimes 2-3 years out. They come in January, have to spend January basically keeping all the guys that Dana had signed in the fold, because they were going to release them and they had to re-recruit them. So then you got February is when you're really starting, and you look at these other schools, they were already starting in December, January, November, September, all the way back. So that's a lot of work you got to try to make up for, and they still signed one of the most healthy classes they have as a member of the Big 12 at the midway point. Finished 3rd in the league right now with a star rating that's 2nd in the history of the program in the Rivals era. So I think that deserves mentioning. 2021 should be better. I think the coaches believe it'll be better. Everything lends me to believe that it will be the case, but now it's about proving it. And so far, this staff has done a pretty good job of proving me wrong, at least. So we'll see what happens.
All right, that's all. That's all the questions. Only 2 of them.
Well, 2. That's better than none. Thanks for tuning in again. If this is your first time watching, go ahead and subscribe. We do this pretty regularly, sometimes in the studio, sometimes in the back cave. But
humble beginnings.
Yes. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Musings from the Mountains.